Hi boys and girls, we are here to read The Man Who Invented Basketball. This story is all about a man named James Naismith, who is the inventor of basketball. This is a biography, and a biography is a story of a person's life told by someone else. As we read today, we're going to think about why would somebody write about James Naismith? And we're going to think about the question, how do talents, or things that you can do really well, make someone unique? Okay, and unique means being the only one of its kind. So how was James Naismith unique? All right, let's start our story today. Tough love and a tough life. Winter in Canada can be very hard. Icy winds sweep down from the north, rivers freeze solid, crossing them can be scary and dangerous. James Naismith turned 11 in 1872. He was old enough to know where the river near his home became safe, solid ice. But he took a shortcut he had never tried before. His team of horses pulled his wagon onto the frozen river. That sounds very scary to me. Their feet pounded the ice. Then one heavy hoof slammed through the sheet of ice. James jumped off the wagon and landed in the water. Grabbing the horses by their reins, he pulled hard. Slowly, he forced them to the other side of the river. I can't imagine being 11 and having to have that responsibility of getting my horses out of the water and it being so cold. James looked around. He saw his Uncle Peter Young watching him from behind some trees, but his uncle had not helped him. Uncle Peter wanted James to learn to solve problems by himself and not to take foolish chances. It was a tough lesson. Okay, so the author helps you make a prediction with clues about what is going to happen later. Okay, so we're going to identify some clues from what we just read, and we're going to use them to make a prediction about something that might happen in James's future. What do you think might happen in James's future? Well, on page 30, the author says that Uncle Peter wanted James to learn to solve problems by himself. I know from the title that James will invent basketball, so I predict that knowing how to solve problems will help him figure out how to do that. James was born on November 6th, 1861, near Almonte, Ontario, which is in Canada. When he was almost 9, his father, John Naismith, came down with deadly typhoid fever. So they would not catch the disease. James, his sister Annie, and brother Robbie were taken to their grandmother's home. A few days later, their father died. 2 weeks later, their mother Margaret died of the same disease. A short time later, their grandmother Annie Young died of old age. So when he was just 9 years old, he had 3 very important people in his life pass away. That left Uncle Peter to take care of the children in Benny's Corners near El Monte. The village had a schoolhouse, a blacksmith shop, a store, and lots of other kids to play with. The children had lots of fun with very little money. When James needed ice skates, he made them. Then he raced out onto the frozen swimming hole like a champion skater. So in my brain already, I am starting to form an opinion about James as a young boy. He sounds like a hard worker. He sounds like he's already an inventor. So he didn't have a lot of money. They were pretty poor. And if he wanted something, he figured out how to get it by making it. So the kids are playing games together. There's a lot of children in the village where James lives. The best game in town was called Duck on a Rock. One player, or the guard, would put a rock about the size of his fist on top of a great big rock near the blacksmith shop. The other boys threw stones at the duck to knock it off the big rock. If they missed, they had to pick up their stones before the guard could tag them. It sounds easy, but it is not. The pitch could be soft, but it had to be perfectly aimed. So you had to pitch the rock, but it had to be soft but hard enough to knock the rock over. When a player missed the duck, there was a lot of running, shouting, and laughing. James would remember Duck on a Rock years later when it would be very important to him. I wonder in my brain what would be the importance of this game. it's kind of foreshadowing and telling me that we're going to see the mention of this game later in the story. James and his friends used a big rock to play their favorite game, Duck on a Rock. And there's a picture of a rock there. I've also included a video after you read the story about Duck on a Rock, and you'll get to see how it's played. The dropout. James was great at sports. He also worked hard on the family farm. He did not work hard at school, though, and his grades were never very good. He wanted to grow up fast and be a man with a job. When he was 15, he left school and worked as a lumberjack. He cut down trees for almost 5 years. Then he decided to change his life. James had a plan. He wanted to go back to high school and finish fast. His next step would be college. In 1883, James entered McGill University in Montreal, Canada. When James was home for a visit, his brother Robbie had a terrible pain in his side. They all thought it was just a stomach ache. It was actually a very bad infection. Robbie died a few hours later. A doctor could have helped him. Knowing Robbie might have been saved stayed in James's mind every day of his life. In 1887, James graduated from McGill University after studying Hebrew and philosophy. Hebrew is an ancient language that many ministers study. Philosophy teaches people to think about life. James had a lot to think about. So not only has James lost his parents and his grandmother, he has now lost his brother. And it also said in the text that that Robbie could have been saved had there been a doctor. So what generalization could we make about James Naismith's brother and his illness? Well, it says that James's brother died because he did not have a doctor nearby. So I can make a generalization that when a person gets very sick, it's always important to have a doctor that you can go to, that you can call. I know that when I'm not feeling well, I go right to MedExpress because it's open even if my doctor's office isn't. So in those days, they didn't have hospitals, they didn't have doctor's offices. They had possibly one doctor in their town and sometimes not even that close. So his illness could have been taken care of had there been a doctor close. The minister plays hardball. For James, the next step was studying to become a minister at McGill's Presbyterian College. There was much to learn, and he studied day and night. His friends tried to get him to play sports. They told him it would sharpen his mind and toughen up his body. He said no and kept on studying. So I can definitely generalize that James Naismith was a pretty smart person. He was a very hard worker. One day, his strong friends dragged him out to the football field. James had so much fun that from then on, he found time to study hard and play hard too. He was smaller than the other players, but he was powerful and smart. He learned rugby, which is a very rough game. He loved lacrosse, which can be even rougher. One Saturday, James got 2 black eyes in a wild game of lacrosse. The next day was Sunday, and he had to give a sermon in the church. James, the student minister, looked out from behind those 2 black eyes. He may have looked kind of funny, but he finished the sermon he had written. In 1890, James became a Presbyterian minister, but he did not want to give sermons in a church. He thought he could help teens live better lives if he talked to them while teaching them sports. His first sports job was at the International YMCA Training School, which is now Springfield College. So he moved from Canada to Springfield, Massachusetts, in the United States. So after going to school and becoming a minister, he moved to the United States from Canada. James Naismith believed that the fun and action of sports could improve the lives of young people. So there he is sitting with a bunch of young boys. As a student teacher, James was very good at the job of teaching baseball, field hockey, football, and rugby, which are great games during spring, summer, and fall. Winter was a problem. The men had to come indoors and exercise, which was not much fun. They were so bored that some of them wanted to quit the YMCA training school. James was told to invent an exciting indoor game. It had to be ready in 2 weeks. That was the deadline. So he worked for the YMCA. He felt that his ministry could help better if he was able to teach through doing, like while the men were playing sports. So he had to make sure that there was something that everyone could do during the wintertime, because we all know we have to stay in at indoor recess, and sometimes it's hard to find something to do because we can't run around and play a rough game. We have to play something that's where we're not going to get hurt. So he had to come up with a game in 2 weeks. He only had a 2-week deadline to come up with a brand new game that was safe enough to play indoors. So what generalization can you make about baseball, field hockey, football, and rugby from the information provided so far? So these are the games that James Naismith played and loved, but you couldn't play them indoors. So what generalization can you make about those sports? Well, many of those games can only be played outside, and you can't really play those games in cold weather. Inventing fun. James struggled with a problem for 12 days. Now remember, he had 2 weeks. There are 14 days in 2 weeks. He was still struggling on day 12. The game had to be fast and fun. It could not be risky like football or rugby with teams of men banging into the gym walls. That good old game from his childhood, Duck on a Rock, flashed into his head. He remembered how using a soft pitch was the best way to aim for the duck. James's eyes lit up. He shouted out loud, "I've got it!" There was no time to invent new gear. 2 peach baskets were used as goals. James explained the strange rules. 2 teams of men dragged themselves onto the gym floor, grumbling. They took a soccer ball and started playing. The grumbling soon stopped. Cheers and shouts filled the gym. The date was December 21st, 1891, basketball was born. Soon, teams formed in gyms all around town. So in 1891, that's 130 years ago, basketball was invented. Now, basketball is still a game we play today. So I can say, or I can draw a conclusion to say that basketball is a pretty popular game. Peach baskets were used as basketball goals before nets. So there's James Naismith holding the soccer ball that they used, and he's got in his other arm a peach basket. In schools across the United States, students began to play basketball. Women began playing too. A young woman named Maud Sherman was one of the first women's teams. James and Maud soon became friends and then fell in love. They married on June 20th, 1894. James and Maud would have 5 children together. In a few years, basketball started being played more like it was played today. So it took a couple years before the game of basketball looked how it looks to us today. The peach baskets had changed to roped baskets. Backboards were added. Dribbling became popular because players were not allowed to hold the ball very long without throwing it. When the ball bounced off the floor as a player raced down the court, it sounded like a fast drumbeat. James thought dribbling was a great idea. Okay, let's keep going here. In 1895, James and Maud moved to Denver, Colorado. There, James became director of physical education at the largest YMCA in the country. He was always working on his plan for the future. He remembered his brother dying horribly without help from a doctor. He had seen athletes have terrible accidents. He wanted to become a doctor and help people. There was no stopping James when he had a plan. He became a student at Gross Medical College in Denver. He would work all day at the YMCA and then studied to be a doctor after work and on weekends. James graduated as a medical doctor in 1898. That year, he got the job of assistant physical director at the University of Kansas. By 1909, James was working there as a minister, a professor, which is a teacher, and a medical doctor. So James Naismith had lots of jobs starting at a very young age, went to school, worked really hard, invented a game, was a minister, and became a doctor. Remembering that his brother could have been saved had there been a doctor close, that inspired him to want to go to medical school, and he became a doctor. And as an adult, he worked at all three of those professions: a minister, a professor, and a medical doctor. James Naismith could have made lots of money by selling sports equipment. He could have used his fame to pose for ads selling products. He refused the offers. He just wanted to do his job as a teacher, minister, and sports doctor. So he didn't invent basketball for the fame. He just really wanted to help people. Okay, so here is the diagram, and if you remember, this was on the cover. This is the diagram of the first basketball. Let me see. George Pierce invented the basketball used today. Here is his sketch for the patent. So you have to get a patent for your invention so that you own that idea. So this was his first. George Pierce was the inventor of the basketball that we use today. Remember, they used a soccer ball. That was probably all that they had. They didn't create new equipment. So now James Pierce, this is his drawing. This is an actual sketch of his idea for the basketball we know to be today. All right. All right, these are the last two pages, and we're going to read through both of these texts. One of these is a timeline. So on the right-hand side is the timeline, and a timeline is used to label events. So it could be events in history, or in this case, it could be the events of a person's life. So it starts when James Naismith is born in 1861, and it goes all the way to when he died. So do you think that every single event that happened in James Naismith's life is on this timeline? If you said no, you would be correct, because there isn't room for everything. A timeline is a quick snippet of the most important events in a person's life. It's kind of like a summary of a story. This is a summary laid out with dates just to show the important events that happened in James Naismith's life. So in 1861, he was born. In 1870, his parents died. In 1887, he graduates from the university in Quebec. In 1890, he becomes a Presbyterian minister. In 1891, he invented basketball. In 1894, he got married. In 95, he became the director of physical education at the YMCA. In 1898, he graduates. In 1909, he is a professor, a minister, and a doctor. In 1917, and these last four events we did not really read about we did not read about these in the biography. In 1997, he helps American soldiers in World War I as a military chaplain. In 1925, he becomes a United States citizen. In 1936, he's honored at the Olympic Games in Berlin, Germany. And in 1939, he dies on November 28th in Lawrence, Kansas. Okay, let's go back to the left side now. Naismith's original 13 rules of basketball in 1891. So as I read these, think about how the rules that were made in 1891 are different from the rules we know of basketball now. Okay, number one, the ball may be thrown in any direction. I know that that is still true. Number two, it can be batted with hands, but not with a fist. 3, no running with the ball. And I know that's called traveling. If you carry the ball, you can't do that. You have to bounce it. 4, Hold the ball only with the hands, so there's no kicking or hitting it off your head like in soccer. 5, no holding, pushing, hitting, or tripping the other team's players. I know that's still a rule. 6, follow the rules or a foul will be declared. 7, make 3 fouls and the other team is given a goal. 8, a goal is made when the ball goes into the basket. 9, when the ball goes out of bounds, the first person to touch it or the umpire will throw it onto the court. 10, the umpire is the judge of the players. He can call fouls, and we call those referees nowadays. 11, the referee is the judge of the ball. He decides on goals. 12, game time is 2 15-minute halves. And 13, the team with the most goals in that time is the winner. So how are the rules then different from the rules now? To me, there doesn't really seem to be many changes. Even though I don't know a lot about basketball, I have watched it, and a lot of these sound like we still follow those same rules made 130 years ago. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed the story. You can go ahead and go to the video about Duck on a Rock, just so you can see what that looks like. All right, boys and girls, have a great day.